How's it going, ninjas? How is everyone going? Welcome to the Coder Dojo. Hope you've been keeping well and that you're ready to do some more work on our missile command project. So I'm going to show you just what I've got so far, and you'll notice this looks a bit different to where we were at part 2. So watch closely because there's a cool little effect. We may get to it today, this cool effect, or we may be covering this next time. Do you see that when we start the game? Sort of the moon moves, which is I kind of like that effect. So, the other thing that happens is we have all of these bases that we need to defend, and if we don't defend them, the explosions come along and destroy them. Oh. I've also tweaked some things like the size of the explosions, and we have a way of losing. And there's also a score and a high score. So we are going to definitely work on getting the bases working and probably getting the scoring system working as well. The new sort of graphical background is not too difficult, but we might not get to it this week. So yeah, that's basically what we're going to be working on today. All right. So as always, just for the first few minutes, I give a bit of time just so there's enough time for people to arrive to the live stream in the chat. If you're watching this as a video, not live, then by all means, if you ever want to tune in, we do these at 4 p.m. every Thursday, Western Australia time. And then if you tune in live, that way if you run into any problems, you can actually ask me over the chat and send me your code, and I can actually help you with your problem. Just a few things. If you are here live, remember to be cool in chat. That's the one rule of the Coder Dojo, is to be cool. And part of that is being positive and encouraging and kind to everyone else who is in the chat as well. If you are live, there's a bit of a latency, so don't panic if there's a bit of a delay between you asking for help and then me starting to give you that help. Don't worry. That latency means that there's a delay in you receiving the video that I'm making. And if you do need help with your project, make sure you've saved it on the Scratch website. Make sure it's saved and it's shared so that when I go looking for it, I can find it. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go over the code that we have so far. So this is where we are up to so far. We've got our rockets falling, we've got our explosions, and we've got our laser beam that can shoot the rockets. So let's have a quick look at the code. Very simple. The cannon just always looks towards the mouse. The laser does the same thing, but also we've got clones of these laser beams, laser bolts set up so that when they are created, when we hit spacebar, it creates a clone, and that clone of the laser beam basically will start off at the cannon, point towards the mouse pointer, and then keep going until it reaches the edge of the screen. That's what all of this is for. We also have a cooldown, which is a variable that's a number that counts down to make sure that you can't just hold down the button and make an infinite number of lasers. Now, this is the interesting thing. I'm not going to go through all of this code, but one thing that we've got is we've got a my block, or as we call it in coding, a function. So whenever we say use this block here, this little line spawn explosion, it runs everything that's underneath define spawn explosion. This is going to be useful later. So yeah, a function is a way of taking a whole series of coding instructions packaging them up into one phrase that you can use that phrase, and it will run that whole list of things that you want to tie to that function or my block. And we're using two variables to communicate to the explosion sprite where the explosion should go. All right, well, let's make a start. I think that's enough time. Let me get my notes up. So first of all, let's make a start on getting these bases working. So I'm going to go and get a building sprite. I like to use simple sprites or sprites that are already in Scratch. You can always go online and find sprites for your various parts of your game, or you can spend a lot more time than I do drawing them. My drawn sprites are very simple, as you can see. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the bottom right corner, hover over that choose a sprite button, that little picture of a cat face, click on that, choose a sprite. So type in building, and you should get this sprite here. If you click on that, it will add in the buildings sprite to your game. So I'm going to rename this to bases, because there'll be these multiple bases and you have to defend them from the rockets. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to think about. Let's have another quick look at what we want the bases to do. So when we hit go, it fills up on the left and on the right of your cannon, right? So what we could do is we could just make a bunch of different base sprites and drag them all out to various points and say, yeah, that's fine. Happy with that. But what I like the idea of is coding one base sprite to start in the bottom left and make a bunch of clones, so that theoretically what we could do is we could shrink everything down and code the bases to fill up any amount of screen. Because I've said a bunch of times before, you can change the size of things, you can change the speed of things. So I want this to work for you no matter how big or small your game is. If you want to have like really small bases, so you've got lots of them and all the rockets are really small, I think that would be pretty cool, and we should be able to do that with code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to, I'm going to move this out the way. That's good. All right. So we've got our bases sprite. So we've got a bunch of different costumes in this bases sprite. And so what we're going to do is just have a look in those costumes. So top left corner, click on costumes. One thing you can choose to do if you want is you might find some of these sprites, some of these costumes are significantly taller than others. You might find some are like different shapes, like this one. If you want, you can delete some of the ones that you don't like. Maybe put the code in first, and then you can kind of make the decision of, I don't like the way that this one looks. This one's too tall, or this one's too wide, that kind of thing. So yeah, let's put some code in. So what we're first going to do is we are going to have and also we lose the game when we run out of bases. So this is a nice simple thing to do. We're going to have a variable that keeps track of how many bases are left. So everyone, once you've got your bases sprite ready, everyone click on code in the top left corner if you were in costumes before, and let's get down to the code. So go to events, the yellow category, on the left side of the screen and look for when green flag clicked. Drag out that when green flag clicked. And then we're going to make a new variable. So go to variables, the dark orange category on the left. I'm just going to get rid of that variable, the my variable, don't need that one anymore. And then I'll click on make a variable. This variable is going to be called bases left. You could also call it something like bases remaining if you wanted. And we need to make sure that, so we're actually going to count the bases as we make them. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to reset bases left to 0 when the game starts. So drag out a set bases left to 0 to 0. Set bases left to 0. Drag that out and put it underneath when green flag clicked. Okay, so normally what I do is when we have a sprite that's a clone, is I hide the original, and each time it when I have a sprite that's making clones, I hide the original sprite and make all of the clones show themselves when they're created. We aren't going to do that this time, and you're going to see why later. So stay tuned for that. What we are going to do, instead of hiding, is we're going to set ghost effect to 100%. So have a think. If you've used Scratch before, what's the difference between hide and set ghost effect to 100%? Because they both make the sprite invisible so we can't see it, but there is a difference. So while you're thinking about that, make sure you click on looks, the dark purple category in the top left corner, and look for set color effect to 0. Drag that out, put it underneath set bases left to 0. Click on that white triangle where it says color, select ghost, and type in 100 over the 0. So now we have set ghost effect to 0. So the biggest difference between hiding a sprite and setting the ghost effect to 0 is collision, in that the code, if something is touching something else, like if I have this this cannon here and it's touching this building, we can ask the code, is the cannon touching the building? And the code can go, yes, they're touching each other. If we make something hidden, if we use hide, then it can't detect if sprites are touching each other anymore. But if we use ghost, even though the sprite is just as invisible, it still does. It still figures out collision. It still figures out if sprites are touching each other or not, and that's going to be useful for later. Okay, so that's the difference. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to set this building to go to the bottom left corner, and at the beginning of the game. We have to make sure it always goes to the bottom left corner because it's going to start when it makes all the bases. We're going to start from the bottom left corner and make a row of them all the way towards the bottom right corner. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we are going to go to motion, the dark blue category in the top left corner, and look 5 down. You should find go to X number, Y number. So you'll have different numbers depending, but you should still see go to X and Y. So these numbers, you can figure out what number you want it to be in the bottom left corner. For now, if you're not sure, just put in minus 220 for X and minus 120, let's say, for Y. Another thing that we should probably do is this base is very, very large. So let's make it a bit smaller. Let's have a look, see how small did I make them before? Yeah, 35. 35 seems good. So let's type in, so to do that, we go to the right side of the screen, look for where it says size 100, click on the 100, and then type in 35. Now you can see the space is a lot smaller, a lot more manageable. So we've got our go to x minus 220 and y minus 120. Got them set to the right size. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create two my blocks. So click on my blocks, that red category at the very bottom of the categories on the left. Then click on make a block. Remember, these are our functions. We are going to make two functions here. And this is going to make it a bit easier for you to see what the code does and how it's divided. So we're going to call the first one create bases. So type in create bases and press OK. So now we should have this nice define create bases over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab out the little create bases, the function, top left corner, drag that out and put it underneath our go to xy. All right, and now we're going to create another my block. We're going to call this check for game over. Check for game over. So hopefully these mostly make sense. I try to give you should generally name your functions what they actually do. This function is going to create the bases at the beginning of the game. It's going to make all of them. And this function is going to check to see if the game is over yet. Or if it should end the game, I should say. So drag out check for game over, that top left little block, my block you've made, and put it underneath. It needs to go underneath create bases because we need to create the bases first and then check for game over. All right, so let's create these bases. So there's a little bit that goes into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to explain it all as we go. But just before we do that, let's have a think about this. So what we want to happen is we want this base sprite, we want it to start here where I'm wiggling it, create a base, then move on, create another base, move along, create another base, move along. When it hits the cannon, we don't want to make a base on top of the cannon. We could, but I'm going to choose not to. I'm going to make it sure it goes past the cannon, then it makes another base, moves along, makes another base, moves along, makes another base, moves along, makes another base, and when it gets to the end it stops. So that's what I want to happen. So what we're going to do is we want it to do this whole thing until it gets to the right side of the screen, right? So the right side of the screen is basically that's left and right. We know how far left or how right it is by what the X position is of the sprite. So let's go to control, the orange category, and drag out a repeat until. Remember, what are we repeating until? Repeat until you hit the right side of the screen. So to do that, what we need to do is we need to go and get an operator. Go to the green category operators. Look about 6 down from the top. You should find this operator here, which is a greater than operator. Now we need to check how far left or right is our sprite, is our base sprite. To do that, we go to motion, the dark blue category, look near the bottom of the dark blue of the motion codes, look for X position, drag that out, and we want it to be greater than, let's say, 220. That should be fine. We can fix some of these, change some of these numbers a bit later if we want. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have the we're going to make the bases, and first I'm going to do it just so it makes the bases. I'm not going to worry about the cannon, and then we're going to fix it so that it doesn't make a base on top of the cannon. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to create a clone of myself. So go to Control, the orange category, look near the bottom for Create Clone of Myself. Drag that out. Then remember that variable that we made, bases left. That bases left variable, we need to update it. So once we've made a new base, we need to increase it by 1. Nice and simple. So grab out, go to Variables, the dark orange category, grab out Change bases left by 1, put that underneath Create Clone of Myself. Okay, next thing that we're going to do is we've got all these nice costumes for our bases sprite, don't we? So let's go to Looks, the dark blue category, and let's get out Next Costume. Drag that out and put it underneath Change bases left by 1. And then the next thing is we are going to go to Motion, because we need the bases to move to the right a little bit. And we're going to drag out Change X by 10. And for now, let's just say Change X by 45. So let's hit go and see what that does. We don't have our clones are all invisible because we've set the ghost effect to 100%. So let's zoom out a little bit. Let's go to events, not events, control. I always do that. Get events and control confused. Look at control. Look near the bottom for when I start as clone. Drag out when I start as clone. Put it off by itself, because we need to make it so that the bases, when they start as clones, when we create them, they need to not be ghosted anymore. To do that, if you go to Looks and look near the sort of middle, bottom, you should find Clear Graphic Effects. Clear Graphic Effects. Look for that, drag it out, put that underneath when I start as clone, then hit go. There we go. So that's very nice, isn't it? We've got these 10 bases being made. And as I said, if you find that you don't like some of these, the size of these bases, like this one in particular is pretty tall, this one's not very tall, if you want, you could change, you could remove some of the costumes. So now what we're going to do is, as you can see, it puts a base right on top of the cannon. So I want to fix that so that if the base's sprite is touching the cannon, it keeps going a little bit more. So there's other things that we can do as well. We could make the size of the base's sprite smaller if we wanted. So if we changed it to 30 instead of 35, then the bases all look smaller. In which case, you might want to make it so that they are all a bit lower as well. For now, I'm just going to leave this as is. But now that we've got this code set up, the reason that it's set up in this way is so that you can do things like you can change it. You can have a look at these numbers, go to change X by 45, and decide, I want all my bases to be closer together. So you can try making that number, that change X by 45, in your create bases code, try making that smaller, see what it does. In fact, actually, let's try that. Change that to 35. Now you can see we've got a lot more bases and they're a lot closer together. That actually looks kind of cool, doesn't it? So have a bit of an experiment. You can do it however you like. And there's even other ways of doing this too. So yeah, you can have a bit of a play around with this. So yeah, I'm going to leave mine spaced out at 35. I like the way that looks. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the bases don't get put on top of the cannon. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to put stuff above where that create clone of myself is. So we actually need to go to events. So hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of a break from coding. We're getting back into our coding now. Have a look at if, go to control, I should say, orange category, and look for if then. So if you've got if then, drag that out and put it right above. So let me show that to you again. So remember, it needs to go right above create clone of myself. Drag out that if then, put it right above create clone of myself. Now here's the thing. Can you see that all the code that we've made is about to go inside the if? There's that gap inside the if. It's all about to go inside the if. We don't want it to go inside the if. We want it to happen after the if. So when I let go, you can see that this has gone into the gap of the if. Grab create clone of myself, drag it down just one, so that it's directly underneath the if, but still inside the repeat until. So you should have it looking like that. You should have a nice little gap underneath our if then. This nesting is very important. Also, one more thing I should do. I'm just going to share my project in the chat. If there's anyone who wants to follow along, you can see my code, and you can just hit remix, and then you'll be up to where I'm at. Okay, so we've got our if then. So the if that we're going to ask is, am I touching the cannon? Which is nice and simple. Scratch has a nice simple little thing we can put inside our if then for that, and that's in sensing, the light blue category, sensing. At the very top you should find touching mouse pointer, question mark. Drag out that touching mouse pointer, and you can see it's this six-sided shape like a hexagon or a jewel, and there's that shape, a hexagon or a jewel socket in between the if and the then. Drop it inside, then click on that white triangle, because we don't care about the mouse pointer. We're asking the question, is the base touching the cannon? Click on the cannon. So now you should have this code that says if touching cannon then. Okay, so we want the bases to move in little steps until the original base's sprite, the one that's making the clones, is not touching the cannon anymore. So this is nice and simple. We are going to get a repeat until, because remember we want to move until we're not touching the cannon anymore. So go to control, look sort of halfway down, you should find roughly there repeat until. Drag out repeat until. Now put it inside that if gap. Make sure it's right in the gap, and now there should be a gap inside the repeat until. Now the question is, we need to say repeat until not touching cannon, and there's an operator just for this. So go to operators, the green category on the left, look about halfway down, and you should find not, and then a little gap, a little socket. Grab out not and put it inside our repeat until, and then we're going to get another touching cannon. So you go to sensing, drag out touching mouse pointer, put it right next to the not. So now we've got repeat until not touching, and then we press that white arrow, that white triangle, and select cannon. So repeat until not touching cannon. And what do we want to do? We want to take those little steps until we're not touching the cannon. So get out a change x by 10. Nice and easy. So all of that should be in there. Hit go. And there we go. Now we have this nice little gap. We've got our bases are all made. We have a nice variable That tells us how many bases we have. The variable says 12, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Perfect! There we go. And you can see it figures out, that works out really well. It's always a bit different because it's always cycling through the different costumes. If you wanted it to always be the same, you just need to basically put in a piece of code that says, this is the costume that I want you to start with at the beginning of the game. And you would put it right underneath when green flag clicked. So yeah, test your code, make sure it's working like mine is working. That's good. Obviously we don't have any of the code yet for the rockets hitting the buildings and that kind of thing. Okay. So, we've got our create bases code done. Good work, everyone. Let's continue on. Let's put in some code for... let's do the code to make the bases go away. Make the bases disappear if they touch an explosion. So, let's go over and look for that when I start as clone code that we made. So go and find that when I start as clone, and underneath it should be clear graphic effects. When I start as clone, clear graphic effects, that's good. So now, let's go to get a forever loop, go to control, because we need to do basically a collision check, which we've already done in this series. Collision check is very simple, forever. If touching explosion, then do some stuff. So remember we need our if then, we've used those already. And we grab out a touching mouse pointer, but we click on that white triangle and we change it to explosion. So notice that I'm saying if touching explosion. That's when we're going to make the bases disappear. There's a reason for that. I haven't said if touching rocket, and you can change this in your own code if you want, but there's a reason for that, and this will come up later. So, if touching explosion, then we need to do two things. We need to update our variable that tells us how many bases are left, to let the game know that there's one less base left, and then we need to delete the clone. So first of all we go to variables, the orange category on the left. We grab out change bases left by 1. If we change bases left by 1, it will add 1 to the variable bases left. We don't want to do that. We want to take away 1. So we put in a minus and then a 1. And then we go back to control. We look at the very bottom of the control codes and you'll find delete this clone. So this is what you should have. When I start as clone, clear all my graphical effects because we don't want to be ghosted anymore. We don't want the bases to be ghosted anymore once they start as clones. Then forever ask this question. Am I touching an explosion? If so, change the bases left by 1 and delete this particular clone. And each clone is going to be asking that question, have I touched an explosion? And they're going to be asking it for the rest of the... So now, we should find, if I make some explosions, and if those explosions touch the bases disappear. And you can see that the bases left also updates. So now what we're going to do is do something very simple. We are going to create some code that ends the game, that stops the program if our bases left ever drops below 1. So remember we made our define check for game over? Go over to that now. Look for define check for game over. And once you're there, again we need another forever. That'll be in control. Drag out a forever loop. And then inside that forever loop, a question loop, because we need to ask the question, do we have less than 1 base left? If we have less than 1 base left, we lose the game. Then we go to operators, because we're asking about less than. Remember how we used greater than before? So go to operators. Less than is the opposite of greater than. So it's 7 from the top. Looks like this one. Do you see? The arrow is pointing to the left side, the empty field there. It's pointing away from the 50. That's a less than operator. So now we go to variables. We look at the top left. We grab out our little rounded bases left variable. We put it in our first socket, and we change this 50. We want the bases left to be less than 1. So if bases left is less than 1, then stop the game. For now, so we can actually create a bit more of a sophisticated game over screen later, but for now, let's do something simple. Let's go to events. No, control. I always do that. Always get events and control confused. Look at control, drag out stop all. It's near the bottom. Stop all and put it inside that if. So you should have that code. I'll leave it up on the screen while I'm testing it. We'll see if I can get all of my bases to go away. Come on. There we go. So now, there we go. The game stops. So, that's all very good. We've got the bases working. Now, one thing is the rockets do not explode when they hit the bases. So let's go across to the rockets and do a bit of changing with the code there. So click on the rocket sprite. Let's have a look around here. So we've got our function spawn explosion, and that basically has a bunch of code in it, 4 lines of it, that basically figures out where the explosion should go, and it creates the explosion, or it tells the explosion to create itself. So this spawn explosion function, this spawn explosion my block, we can actually use this more than once, and we are going to, because we're going to do some, because right about now is where we're going to set up our score. So everyone go to variables, and everyone click on make a variable, and we're going to call this variable score. So everyone still in variables, the orange category on the left, click on make a variable again, and we're going to go and make a variable called high score. I'll write it out in full, high score. So now we should have 2 new variables, the score and the high score. Our bases left variable, in the top left corner, can you see it's got a tick next to bases left? That's so that we can see that variable. We actually don't need to see that variable. That variable is doing its job, and we don't need it. We don't need to worry about it anymore. So just untick it so we can't see it anymore. But the player is going to want to see their score and the high score. So feel free to move the score and the high score around in your game window in the top right corner. Once you've got those 2 variables, that will set us up for what we're about to do next. Excellent. Okay, so first of all, we need to make sure that our score variable starts the game off at 0, so it doesn't remember the score from the previous game. So have a look on the left side. You should have a set variable to 0. So it might have a different variable than score, but have a look for set variable to 0. Mine says set bases left to 0. Drag that out for now. Put it right underneath when green flag clicked, because we need this to happen at the beginning of the game. And then make sure you click that white triangle, and make sure that you click on score, because because we want the score, your score, when you're playing the game, to be 0 when you start the game, because you've just started the game. Okay, so that's good. While we're here as well, can you see that the rockets start falling straight away, even while the bases are filling up? So let's just put in a nice wait before our rockets start creating themselves, start cloning themselves. So go to control, and at the very top of the control code you should see wait 1 second. Now drag that out and put it just above the forever and just below set Y to 190. Okay, so wait 1 second will happen before this forever loop. What's inside that forever loop? That's the forever loop that creates the clones of all the rockets, that spawns them all at the top, and when they spawn at the top they go towards the bottom. So I'm going to make this wait for 2 seconds. I'm going to click on that 1, type in 2, and so now got this nice little pause before the rockets start falling. That's good. That's really good. Okay, so now let's have a look at the when I start as clone code. So I'm going to zoom in on that. Everyone go over to here, and we're going to tidy this up a little bit. So when I start as clone, the rocket first shows itself because the original was hidden, then it points down, and then it repeats until it reaches the bottom of the screen. Move 3 steps, and then ask this question: am I touching a laser or an explosion? Then run this function, this myblock, that's called spawn explosion. Now, let's do something a bit cool. Let's drag out, click on that OR, drag out the OR, and you should now have touching laser or touching explosion that's been dragged out and just popped in a white bit of the screen. And then drag the touching laser back into the if. So now you should have if touching laser then spawn explosion, right? So now grab the OR, and it should also have touching explosion attached to it, and throw it away, left side of the screen. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this if touching laser then spawn explosion. So right click on the if, right click, it's this finger here, right click, and then normal click when it says duplicate. You should have 3 options and you want to choose the first one, duplicate. So now you have this whole copied if touching laser then spawn explosion. Now put that directly underneath the other if. Make sure it's not sucked up inside. Make sure it's not sucked up inside the other if. Make sure it's right underneath if touching laser. So it looks like this. Can you see these are nicely lined up? This if and this if are perfectly lined up. Neither one of them is inside the other, but they are both inside the repeat until. Okay, now do that again. Duplicate and make another one. So now you should have this perfectly lined up line of if touching laser then spawn explosion, if touching laser then spawn explosion, if touching laser then spawn explosion. So click on the white triangle for 2 of these and change it to explosion for one of them and bases for the other. So now we have got these 3 questions. Am I touching a laser? If you are, then spawn explosion. Am I touching an explosion? If you are, then spawn explosion. Am I touching a base? If so, then spawn explosion. So this is the really useful thing about having functions, about having myblocks, is that we don't have to, because remember, all this stuff happens inside spawn explosion. We don't have to copy this each time. We just write in spawn explosion, and it always goes to here and runs all of this stuff that's underneath define explosion. It runs all of that code. The other useful thing is we're going to put scores in now. So we're going to make it so that when a rocket touches a laser, and when a rocket touches an explosion, and when a rocket touches a base, it changes your score in different ways. So this first one here, if touching laser, then spawn explosion. Let's go to variables, the dark orange category on the left. Let's grab out a change variable by, and let's put it above the spawn explosion. Very important that we put it above the spawn explosion, because at the end of spawn explosion it says delete this clone. So if the clone's deleted, it can't run any more code. So get our change variable by, and click on the white triangle and select score. And then click on the 1 and type in, so if it touches, let's make our score go up by 100, shall we? Let's make the numbers nice and big. Change score by 100. Now drag out another change variable by and put it underneath the if touching explosion. Make sure that it says score. And so if the rocket explodes because it's touching another explosion, then type in 200. I like the idea that you get more points if you manage to set off a rocket with the explosion of another rocket instead of just shooting all of the rockets. I think that's kind of cool. And then finally, underneath if touching bases, drag out change a variable by, make sure it says change score by, and we'll say minus 300. We'll say if a base dies, you lose 300 points. That seems kind of cool. I like that idea. And there's one more thing. At the very bottom is delete this clone. This delete this clone is what happens if the rocket gets all the way to the bottom of the screen without being shot. It just disappears, which I find kind of dissatisfying. What we're going to do is we're going to take out this delete this clone at the very bottom, drag that away, put underneath a spawn explosion. So if it hits the bottom of the screen, it will explode. And why not? Let's make it so that you lose some points if it hits the bottom of the screen. You can change these rules if you want. Have a play of the game. So change score by minus 50. Okay. So let's test the game now. So you can see when the explosions spawn, they take out the bases, and when we run out of bases, that's the end of the game. So we've got all this working. This is all good. I think we're going to cover the nice moon upgrade next week, and we'll also cover some ways of making our rockets a bit smarter next week, and we'll also cover the high score next week. You may already have a good idea of how to change your high score, in which case, by all means, put some code in to make the high score work. But otherwise, don't stress. We'll talk about it next week. Now, just a few things. Playing this game, there's a few things that I wouldn't mind changing. One of them is these explosions are a bit big. So, because as you can see, the explosions are a bit too big. Sometimes they have these massive chain reactions that just go from rocket to rocket to rocket. Also, the rockets themselves, they're a bit big, and they're moving maybe a bit fast. So have a bit of a play with this. This is all optional. This is all gameplay stuff. The code is working fine. And you can change this if you want. But first of all, if you want to do it, if you want to follow my instructions exactly, then just try this out for size. If you want to make the explosions smaller, then go to the explosion sprite and look underneath when I start as clone and look for that repeat 50. One thing we probably will do next week is maybe set up most of these numbers with variables so we can experiment with them. But for now, let's just click on the 50 next to repeat 50 in our explosion sprites code. Type in 30 instead. And let's see. I think I liked if we click on the rockets, I liked making them just a little bit smaller. So click on the rocket, look next to where it says size 30 and type in size 25. And also have a look, we've got all this code here underneath when I start as clone, but look for move 3 steps. Click on that 3 and type in 2. Now if you didn't get all of those, don't worry too much, because next week we're going to go into a bit more detail about tying some of these to variables, but I think the game plays a little bit better like this. And possibly even, what would be nice is maybe spawning rockets a bit more often. Currently, the number that our rockets are spawning every 0.5 seconds. So if you look at when green flag clicked, look for that piece of code. When green flag clicked, then look all the way to the bottom, and just shy of the bottom you should have wait 0.5 seconds. Click on that 0.5 and type in 0.3. And now you should have more rockets more often. And there we have it. So if the game's a bit too hard, have a bit of a look at the code. Try and figure out the way that we've set it up, how you could make the game easier. Can you make the explosions a bit smaller? Can you make the rockets a bit slower? You can set it up how you like. And because it would be really good to be able to make this game your own and to sort of figure out kind of how to make it more fun. You'll also notice now, look at the rockets that are hitting the ground. They go up in explosions, and that just seems a lot more satisfying, doesn't it? Okay, and the other nice thing about if we put all of these things like the size of the explosions, the speed of the rockets, all of that stuff into variables, is as the game goes on, we can make the game get harder. Or we could even have an easy, medium, hard difficulty selection at the beginning of the game, which would be kind of cool. If we put in a menu for how easy or difficult the game is, and it changes things, makes the explosions bigger, makes the rockets faster, that kind of thing. So have a bit of a play with that. As always, check out my code. That's what we have time for today. I hope you've had fun. And I hope that was interesting. As always, if you get stuck with your code, send me a message on Scratch or leave a comment in the YouTube video and I will get back to you with a solution. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get notifications when the next live streams are coming out. We do these every Thursday at 4 p.m. The next stream is going to be part 4 of our missile command tutorial. And you can put your games in the Futures Lab studio in Scratch. If you haven't been invited to that, then let me know in the comments, or again send me a message on Scratch, or let me know in the chat by tuning in live. So until I see you guys next week, stay awesome, be cool to each other, and we'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves, ninjas.